So this week I wanted to get into this is the Lechaim, Rav Chaim Friedlander, who was one of the sort of early Rabbanim Mashgichim in Israel, like as the yeshivas were being rebuilt after the Holocaust. So he becomes one of the early Mashgichim of Ponevezh, learned under other Rabbanim like Rav Dessler. And this is sort of the introductory material he has on Rosh Hashanah. Before we jump right into the Sifsei Chaim, though, he quotes from Rav Dessler, and I just wanted to look at that first. So I'm just going to jump to the Michtav Mi'Eliyahu. Really interesting piece that from Rav Dessler that really ties into tefillah that we were talking about a few weeks ago. So let's take a look at this, and then we'll get into the Sifsei Chaim and see where he quotes this. So he says that this is tefillah hi mehusa b'chiraso shel adam. That tefillah is the essence and really what we sort of choose and strive for as a person. So what does he mean by that? So he says. So he quotes B'birchas ahava rabba omrim. We see this right before Kriya Shema, that we should unify our hearts, or Hashem should unify our hearts to love and to fear. How do we ask Hashem to help us to love and fear Hashem? Like, Chazal tell us that everything is in Hashem's hands, but we have to make the choice to choose Yirah Shamayim. We can't ask Hashem to give us Yirah Shamayim. Also, when we ask that Hashem gives us our chelek in Torah, that our chelek in this world should only be in Torah. That we should feel focused, and that's all. That should be like the one thing that we want to be doing. How do we ask for such a thing when, again, we're asking Hashem to sort of put this in our heart? So he says, let's take a look at what is tefillah. What do we mean by that? So he says the first thing is, I remember Rizal, the Gemara Brachos in Hamad Beis. There's shnaim shenichnasu lispalo kidem echad mehem lispalo v'lo himtin lechaver v'yetza. So the Gemara talks about two people who go in to daven. I guess they're walking to shul together. The first one finishes before the second one, and he doesn't wait for his friend, and he walks out of shul. So the Gemara says, Tarfin lo tefilasa b'fanav. His tefillah is ripped up in front of him. Shnei Amar, the pasuk in Iyuv says, Tarif nafsha ba'apo malanecha ta'azov aretz. It says Tarif nafsho, his soul, his nefesh, is torn. Ayin Shem Rashi, and Rashi over there explains, like, how do we understand? So what's the Gemara doing by taking this pasuk that says Tarif Nafsho and equating that to the Gemara that says Tarfin lo tfilaso? What does one have to do with the other? So in other words, how is Rashi learning that? Ayin Shem Rashi, Shemevar ech mirumezes atfila belashon nafsho. So Rashi gets into that and explains how tefillah is merumez, is an idea, is a hint at the language of nefesh. Shema hi nefesh zu tefillah. Rashi says nefesh is tefillah. Shneimar ve'eshpoch es nafshi lifnei Hashem. It says, and I believe this is by Chana, that it says that I poured out my nefesh before Hashem. What does it mean? When Chana says, she said that in David, but I poured out my soul. So the mehus of nefesh is tefillah, is what Rashi is saying. Why is she putting in those words? It's because the nefesh is the tefillah. Every aspiration that we have really is a tefillah. It's something that we want, and it's something that we end up davening for. That is just simply how we are built. That when we have a desire, an aspirational desire that's really strong, it manifests itself in words that we say, and in our hearts, and also in in our lips as tefillah. Or Amr Rizal, then va'apum de mechsarasa rachmana kri, kol adam shov mispalo tamid, oy shaviz barach, al kochos hateva hamedumim. And it's interesting, if you watch people, I was thinking about this, like it's very common that people say things like, Hashem, or God give me help, or something like we'll say things like that when we're sort of in a moment of, feeling vulnerable or helpless or something like that. And I think that's what he's saying, is that is just the nature of us, how we're sort of wired through our neshama, is that when we have something that's aspirational, something we want to achieve, the normal inclination of us is to daven for it. Or, unfortunately, others will sort of turn to, Mother Nature, or, what other kochos there are out there that people talk about. So that's the first thing. The second thing he says, Vanit tefillah. I am tefillah in Tehillim. I will dive into you all the time. This is a constant thing. And because of that, it's not just that I'm davening in shul, I'm constantly thinking about and davening to Hashem. The third idea, Yehuda ve'evnana. This is in Lechaim. V'lo pirish tefillah so Hashem ka'asher pirish beperek Aleph. We'll actually leave this just so we can get back to the Lechaim. But we can see that there's a few different ideas that he's talking about, where tefillah is really something that's sort of innate and intrinsic within us. So let's take that idea and let's just see how the Lechaim uses it and develops it a little bit. So first, the Lechaim starts out with Yom Trua, Yom Zikaron. So he says Rosh Hashanah Nikra B'Torah Yom Trua. So in the Pesukim in Torah, we refer to Rosh Hashanah as Yom Trua. Kakasuv B'Chodesh Hashvi B'Echad LaChodesh Yom Trua Yelochem. Right, that's the pasuk that says on the 7th month, on the first day, right, the day of Rosh Hashanah, that is Yom Trua. V'lo Chazar shetiknu lanu as nusach hatfilos karu leRosh Hashanah Yom Hazikaron. Interestingly enough, though, Chazal refer to it as Yom HaZikaron. Kamasha anu omrim batitin lenu Hashem Elokeinu b'yahava as Yom HaZikaron hazeh. V'chem b'tfilas yalav yavo Yom HaZikaron hazeh. U'b'siyim birchas hayom mekadesh Yisrael v'Yom HaZikaron. So within our davening, certainly within the Shemona Esrei, we see the reference to Yom HaZikaron all the time. But Tzarech Levar, Madua Chazal Shinu as Shema Rosh Hashanah B'Tfilah. So why does Chazal change that and use Yom HaZikaron instead of Yom Trua? So it says, Ela HaTorah Mehusa Hi Lahoros Lanu as Haderech Hashan Nelech Ba Ve'as HaMitzvahs She'aleinu La'asos. He says, we have to understand, Torah is really there to sort of guide us and understand the mitzvahs that we have to perform. Lechaim Torah Rosh Hashanah Nikra Yom Trua, and therefore Rosh Hashanah is Yom Trua because Mipnei Shezeh Mashet Tzivanu Hashem Yisbarach La'asos B'Yom Hazeh. Right, because Hashem commanded us, the one mitzvah we really have that's really special for Rosh Hashanah is to blow the shofar. Lumas Zos Hatfila Matarasa Hi Lechazik Ulebases Es Hakara Sha'Kohu Me'is Hashem Yisbarach. And however, when we think about it, what is the purpose of the shofar? What's the purpose of the tefillah? It's really to strengthen and to build a foundation for recognizing Hashem Yisborach throughout our lives in the world. And to also feel that we really are dependent on Him for everything. And through the fact that we recognize that Hashem is, that we need Hashem and that Hashem is really present in our lives, that then fulfills or fills our bakashos and davening kedei lechazkeinu, so that it strengthens us in our emunah and bitachon. Lechaim betfilas Rosh Hashanah anu mazkirin is pu'ulas Hashem hamiyuchedes liyom zeh hazikaron, and that's why we call it Yom HaZikaron, because that's really what's going on. שממשמעותו הפעלת הנהגת ההשגחה פרוטיס עלינו לטובה. כלשון חז"ל, אמרו לפני זיכרונוס, כדי שיעלה זיכרונכם לפני לטובה. Chazal tell us that Hashem says that you will say in front of me these zichronos in order that your memory in front of me will be for good. Bishum kach shmosha Rosh Hashanah b'tfilahu yom hazikaron. Ach lefi zeh tzarich lahavin madua b'makom echad b'tfilah anu kein omrim shorosh Hashanah hu yom trua. Kakasuv atitan lenu Hashem Elokeinu b'yahavo as yom hazikaron azeh yom trua. But we see that we also call both names, Yom HaZikaron and Yom Trua. Elebemis Shmosho Yom Rosh Hashanah Betfilahu Yom HaZikaron, Ella Sheshba'aso HaRuchanis Shel Hayom Alenuhu B'tchiyas HaShofar. But we still have to realize that even though our davening is all about being a Yom HaZikaron, but we still have to realize that the spiritual sort of hashpah, that the influence of the day upon us is through the Tchiyas HaShofar. And that's in the Trua. Shabbat la'areinu lahamlich alenu as Hashem yisbarach. V'lachso b'tshuva shlema lefonav ki Trua melashon te'ura hisorurus. Right, the Trua is the sort of the beep, 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 that sort of wakes us up. Right, it makes us feel like it's a cry, and that's the idea. Trua means hisorer, to wake up. L'chein anu omrim kan yom Trua nimsa shekodem anu Mazkirnas Shem Hachag Yom HaZikaron v'chakach Yom HaTrua dahainu as tafkido v'hashef haruchani shemushpa alenu b'mizgeres kedushas hazman hamyuchad shel Rosh Hashanah. And that's really the idea, is that it's both. It's the Yom HaZikaron and it's the Yom HaTrua that provide this sort of framework for us for what we have in Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so right, L'davar shahari kach tiknu chazal gam beketa hamakber b'shar tfilas hamoedim kigam atita lenu es yomar chag hashvuos. Is that like if you look at the parallel in the davening for the shlosh regalim, where we say atita lenu zer shmosha chag. That's we call it the name of that chag. Shahari gam zeh gam shmo b'tfilas yalav yevo b'kiddush v'achakach zman matan torasenu shezu hashpah and so he says, very similarly to the other Chagim, we have two different names, and they come together to tell us what is special about that specific day. Okay, so now we understand a little bit. It's Yom Trua, but it's also Yom HaZikaron, right? It's certainly a day of davening, and that's the Yom HaZikaron bit. Okay, so Zochreinu Lechaim. So, Kasavar Chal Kinei Hadam Nidun Techila Alpi Mazev Limos Limanus Betzadikim or O Bereshayim V'Zenikra Mamish Sefer Chaim V'Sefer Mesim Dahainu Hanikva Bin Tzadikim Hu Nichva B'Sefer Chaim V'Alzem Yispalim V'Omrim Zochreinu Lechaim. Right, we know this Ramchal, and we know from others that there's this idea of the Sefer Chaim, the Sefer Mesim, and we're davening to Hashem Zochreinu Lechaim, that Hashem should remember us for Chaim. But there's other gezerus that we also daven for, that we should be inscribed in the book of life, Lechaim Tovim, Kolomar. Hadin Arishon Shenadon Berosh Hashanah Hu Likboaz Mehusa Adam Umatzavo Ha'im Hu Tzadik or Lahefech Chas V'Shalom Yalzeh Anu Mevakshim Hashem Yisbarach Zochreinu Lechaim because we're in the Sefer Chaim Sheikba Bedino Sha'anu Tzadikim. So what we're asking from Hashem is that we should be inscribed in the book of life, so that we should become tzaddikim, and that we should not be those Rishayim. But there's another point to it, that there's also what we're davening for is for just the gashmius, that we want the material of this year to be good for us, right? In this world. And that's one of the inserts later on in the Shemona Esrei, is because of the Chaim Tovim b'Sefer Chaim, right? We say that in Sim Shalom. So it's not just the ruchnis, but it's also the gashmis that we're davening for. So the first thing that the Sifsei Chaim wants to understand is why are we davening for the Gashmias? He says, "Hine yesh levar madua anu mispalim mevakshim asher mizbarach sheyigzor aleinu gezeros tovos afal pi shegam kasher lo nevakesh davar kol masha Kadosh Baruch Hu osa lanu atovos varos hu rak letovaseinu." This is a really interesting question. Like, why do we have to daven for Gashmias on Rosh Hashanah? He says, we know that Hashem really only wants what's best for us anyway. He's only going to be gozer, right? The decrees that come from Hashem are only for what's best for us. Why do we have to daven specifically for the Gashmias? So it says, "V'od im hatzaros hem levot letovasenu madua yeshna HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a gezer bigla bakashasenu." It says, and further, if the gezeras that seem, the tsaros that we have to deal with, whatever they are in our lives, if those are really only for our benefit anyway, for our good, then why would Hashem ever change those just based on our davening, asking Hashem to only, to not give us those tsaros? Why would he change it if it's really for our benefit? Hinem biyad Hashem yisbarach hamecharesh mevahava osam bechol rega bekasher nargish kach nizbato klapav v'yizkarav elav yisbarach b'schara kara hazu kedei le'azar lizchazeg v'mnosenu yimale Hashem yishalosenu kasher miluyin hu letovosenu elo sharak ayidei tefila anu ru'uyim lekablam. He says something interesting that I think we saw very similarly from Rav Pinchas in his introduction to in Sharon Batfila, that the Lechaim says that the thing is that we have to understand is that the purpose of tefillah is for us to recognize Hashem as being really the only power in the world, and everything comes from Hashem, and we need to daven in order for Hashem to sort of open the gate. I'm going to sort of use Pinchas's language, but to open the gate and to provide us all those things that Hashem wanted to provide us anyway. But we first have to daven for it. Once we recognize that we daven for it, then Hashem, and therefore we are now worthy of Hashem providing that rachamim. Yigzar aleinu gezeros tovos b'gashmish shikolo aleinu as avodas Hashem b'shana hanechneses, and then we get those gezeros, for the incoming year. Even if we're not really worthy of it, just our own spiritual level of what we've attained. But he says that what we are able to achieve in Rosh Hashanah is to say to Hashem, listen, we may not be there yet, but we are requesting the rachamim on us, and we're requesting only the best for us, because this year we're going to achieve. In other words, we're sort of asking for it on credit, right? That Hashem provide us this good gezerah, and we are going to try and be worthy of it as the year progresses. Okay, so how does that work exactly? So lefi ha'amar mevinim anu as mashmos tefillasenu b'mei ha'dinshi. So Hashem yisborach yigzor alenu shana mevureches b'gashmis. Ach adayin kosher ma shayach levakesh Hashem yisborach yikova as matzavinu haruchni ketzadikim hari lechora zu mitzius. V'im anu tzadikim b'emes hari shenichtav bein hatzadikim gam מבלי שנבקש על כך, אם איננו צדיקים, אין איך יכול תפילה להור לשנוס את מצבנו שנחר בין הצדיקים. But he says, how does that work exactly? Because if we're already tzadikim, then we should, benefit from what we would get, because of our situation. But if we're not, how is it that Hashem is able to give us something that we're really not worthy of getting in the first place? Like, how does that work exactly? It's So you can't say that Hashem is simply going to ignore, be mevater, right? That concede, provide concessions to us and say, oh yeah, you weren't perfect. You didn't do all the things you were supposed to do. It's okay. I'm going to ignore that. Chas v'chalila. We know that the Gemara in Bava Kama tells us that anybody who believes that is really being mevater their own life, meaning that you're really betting on something you're going to lose on in the end. Hashem is not mevater. So, okay, so we can't assume that. So what exactly is it then? Exactly. And he goes on and he says, and he asks, oh, yesh li shol, eich anu mispalim uvechin tein b'matana pachtecha al kol ma'asecha, right? We say throughout the davening in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, uvechin tein pachtecha al kol ma'asecha. How do we daven for that? That Hashem should give almost like a matana, the pachad to everyone. Klomar, tinata bilibenu yira shemayim. How are we saying just give us all yira shemayim? Let just sort of throw it at us and we'll have it. So how are we doing this? This is some of the question he asked above. We have to strive and work at that at Yira Shemayim. It's not something you can simply just throw at us. After Lomer Sha'af b'ma shenogea la'avodas Hashem Yira Shemayim tafkidu shel adam hu rak liftoch pesach kechuda shomachat Hakadosh Baruch Hu Yazreyu v'yashlim lo smadragasinu aruchnes kepischa shel ulam. So we know that there's famous Chazal. There's more than one that says that all we have to do is open up, create an opening like the head of a needle, and Hashem will open it up the size of an entire ballroom or something like that. So we only have to do a little bit. So maybe that's one way to approach it. He says is that really what we're doing is we're asking that you help us opening up just a little bit, and then we'll get, we'll be able to achieve that. Okay. So it's Haya Lahem Lomar Teinata. See, it's just we're running out of time, so just want to try and focus on getting a little bit further. So let's just let's just go over here. We're going to skip a couple of paragraphs. He really develops this in a nice sort of orderly fashion, but there's certainly a lot here. So we'll try to just skip over a little bit. So he says, Tefillah amitis, ki hagilui v'adbitu l'she'ifos hapnimios hamukos shel nefesh ha'adam. What is true tefillah? He says that's really just the revelation, the expression of our own internal aspirations, really through the depths of our nefesh, right? It's really what's going on inside of us, and we're simply expressing it. Hamishana says mehusa haruchnius, v'zuhi hagdora amuka shel mehus hatfilah, v'yata narchiv v'nevayer es hadfarim. So that's really the idea of what tefillah is. And again, this is where he quotes that piece that we saw before from Rav Dessler. So he says, Mahi and nefesh zu tefillah, k'moshe ne'amar v'eshpoches nafshi lifnei Hashem, quotes again, really all those pieces that Rav Dessler quoted that by Chana, where she says, v'eshpoches nafshi lifnei Hashem, dahainu mehusa nefesh yet tefillah. Really, the essence of the nefesh is tefillah. B'haraya lakachi me'aposach she'amra Chana, mikach she'tiara es tfilaso bebitui v'eshpokas nafshi, right? That's how we understand it. Raya she'tfila amitis he bitui lemehus hanefesh. This is the raya. This is the evidence that tefillah, the true tefillah, really is simply the expression that comes right out of our nefesh. Kitochin atfila megale es madregas and nefesh shel hamispalo, and our tefillah is really reveals where our nefesh is holding, like where we're holding as we daven. And it's interesting, he says, by the way, think about the mushal that's being used, the eshpoch in our pour. It's like pouring out a pitcher of water. What you're doing is taking what's inside of it and you're releasing it to the outside. He said that's really what tefillah is. We're simply taking what's really deep inside of us and we're releasing it out. We're expressing it. So he says, "Kedei lahavin heitev es hakesher shebein hanefesh letfila alinu lahasbir mahi hanefesh. Hanefesh hi mekor haretzonos v'shifos." And he says, let's keep going with this idea and really explore it. That the nefesh is really the source of all of our wants, our wishes, and our desires and our aspirations. Just like Kafi Sha'amar Avram lebnei Ches, when Avram says he wants to bury Sarah, he says, "Im yesh es nafshechem likbor es mesi." What do you mean? If there is to your souls, to your nefesh, to bury my mace, what does that mean? Rashi says, "Nafshechem ritzonechem." If it's your will, so your will and your nefesh seem to be, at least interrelated or connected with that idea. Hanefesh hatov ritzoneh rak tov, and nefesh hara chavitzu la'asos ra. So it's possible for your nefesh to be corrupted as well and to do evil or to do bad. However, when we're talking about davening, that's really the nefesh hatov is coming out. Beinonim shebenafsha me'urav hatov v'ra lechein ritzona mischalif pam yishtokeku la'asos tov v'lefamim yirtzu bera. And we should realize it as, most of us are beinonim. We're not Sadiq and Gemorim. We're not Rishoim either. So sometimes we sort of go both ways, and we have to realize that sometimes our nefesh itself is requesting something that's not necessarily the best for us. So Lechaim Amar Hakazov Nefesh Ki Secheta Bishgaga. In another pasuk that he quotes, that it says by bringing a korban, Nefesh Ki Secheta Bishgaga. When a person does a sin Bishgaga, he says Nefesh. Why nefesh? Why not ki adam or something like that? Ki nefesh haratzon hiya mevia lechet, because the nefesh is the ratzon, is your will. That's what brings you to hate in the first place. And he says, by the way, if you're doing something b'shogeg, that really is a sort of a corruption of your nefesh, meaning that it's, you sort of did it accidentally. How did you do it accidentally? That there's something not quite, how did you forget at Shabbos, or how did you forget that, whatever it is. So he says, "Tefillah bitu," and we'll wrap up here. So nimtzah mehusa nefesh hu haratzon v'ashi'ifa. So the essence of the nefesh really is what we said: the ritzon and the she'ifa, the desire, the will, the aspiration. Umah she'adam shoif oso hu mevakesh imkin bakasha kana ba'amitis novas mashpia mishe'ifa megala osa. And what he says is that that's really what we're davening for when we say Zochreinu Lechaim. What we're really davening for is we want to be remembered, and we want to have life, meaning life of ruchnius, life of being a tzaddik. That's really what we're davening for on Rosh Hashanah when we say Zochreinu Lechaim, melechofetz b'chaim. That's all of what we're davening for. Yes, there's the Gashmius in there as well, as we talked about earlier, but that's really what we're saying when we sing that, and we say it over and over and over again over Rosh Hashanah and over Yom Kippur. Something to think about is that that's really what we're asking Hashem, is to really sort of dig into our soul and say, this is really what we are aspiring towards, and please Hashem, help us to achieve that over this coming year. So with that, we'll leave it, and hopefully we'll do one next week. Maybe we'll try to get it in before Yom Kippur, just to try and look at a little bit more on Yom Kippur davening as well.